Nadia. Thank you very much for agreeing to chat with us this morning. Just first off the bat, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your links with Henley and your association with the business school?
Yes, absolutely. So I am a chartered occupational or business psychologist by profession. I'm an accredited coach, and my background professionally and in terms of my career has been a lot of work in leadership development, looking at I suppose organizational culture and supporting organizations from a strategic perspective to be able to embed new, more effective processes and systems. And certainly from a leadership perspective, being able to support leaders in how to affect the change that they want. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I do. My connection with Henley Business School is that in 2014, I won the 30% Club Financial Times scholarship for the Executive MBA. So I won a scholarship to do an Executive MBA at Henley, and I started that in October 2014, and finished it and graduated in 2016.
Yeah,
So,
fantastic. Thank you. How was that experience? Was the MBA something you'd planned on doing, and how did you find it when you were here with us?
so had I planned on doing it? I think I had always, well, not always, but it definitely crossed my mind in my career at that point that it would be great to do one, and that it would add an extra string to my bow, so to speak. As a business psychologist, there's not that many who have an executive MBA, so it was sort of a differentiator. Um, but I couldn't have afforded it for sure. I was working for local government at the time. There was absolutely no way. It's not like it was a big corporate who would pay for it. And we certainly couldn't afford it. So in January 2014, I had our first daughter. And so again, young family, working for local government, absolutely no way. And so yeah, the desire was there, but not the money. And so this was an incredible opportunity, which I grabbed with, both hands and just embraced. And I absolutely have to say it's one of the most positive learning experiences that I have had in my life. Being in the room with some incredible leaders in their own right from different companies. I was the only public sector person, I have to say, and everyone else from different industries, at different points actually in their career, but broadly all wanting to debate and discuss and have intellectual conversations about the module that we were discussing. And of course, I have to say, you know, incredible tutors and people delivering the program. It was a very well put together program, and I think really what set it apart from the rest were the fabulous faculty, including Chris Dalton, who
Mm.
runs the personal development module, which I again, it set Henley apart. So I've been incredibly fortunate to be in that environment and to learn across those 2 years, from the best.
Yeah, no, it is. It's Henley's quite a special place, isn't it? I think
It is.
it's a funny combination of perfect sort of cohort sizes, tutors, and also Greenlands is quite a place for reflection.
Oh, it's just, it was one of those things because obviously I had a newborn baby.
Mm,
Well, she was 10 months when I started. And as I left home, because it was one long weekend every month. And so I would be staying overnight, for 3 nights. And as I entered the Greenlands campus, and then there's this sweeping driveway with lambs and sheep on either
mm,
side of you, and then this beautiful white building emerges, and there's just this bubble that
mm,
I ended up, and I just felt this sense of calm as I sort of drove up, and just there's an at home. I felt at home
mm.
there. Um, and really looked forward to those evenings where we were socializing in the bar and enjoying a nice meal, and just kind of, especially after motherhood, where, it's all about milk and poo and nappies. I was like, you know,
Mm.
just to have that intellectual stimulation and to be around those people. I mean, it was just incredible at that point in my life.
Mm.
Yeah, there's no other way to describe it.
No, it's really good to hear that it came as it was a supportive educational process as well. It would have been quite tough winning a women in leadership scholarship and just entering motherhood and then finding it too tough to even complete. So
Mm,
that's really good to hear. Um,
yeah.
and so looking ahead, you then progress from a business psychologist, public sector, to then moving forward, and then we're looking at your new book in particular, Beyond Discomfort. So what was the driving force behind writing it? Did that come from past experience? Did it come from the MBA or something else? What was the driving force?
So it started with the MBA, if I'm being honest. So during the MBA, as part of it, we had to complete a thesis, a dissertation. And I was at the time really interested in diversity and inclusion from a perspective of gender, from a personal story that I had, which was in order for me to be able to say yes to this scholarship, right?
Mm,
My husband needed to be able to firstly want to be an active carer, which he did, but secondly have an organization that supported him to be stepping away from the workplace when he needed to in order for me to do what as I said, I was away one long weekend every month. Um, and we had like 10 days in South Africa, and I went to Shanghai. So all of that, he needed to be able from a work perspective to say yes. And so I was interested then. I was like, how many women then in heterosexual relationships um, have to say no to career opportunities because their husband's organization or their partner's organization, their male partner's organization, isn't supportive of them stepping away and being a carer because it's seen as men provide for their families, and so therefore they should be stepping in and doing more, in fact, in the workplace rather than in their jobs rather than stepping away. So that's what I researched. And so that's what really led me into diversity, equity, and inclusion initially, from
mm,
through a gender perspective. And I started doing a lot of keynoting around male equity in the workplace, thinking about gender equity from a systemic perspective. So yes, we should support women and we should have some positive action programs and sponsorship programs and support women to progress in the workplace and keep them in the workplace after children. But equally, how do we support men to lean into their caring responsibilities so that
mm,
actually it makes it more feasible if they have a female partner for that female partner to progress her career in the way that she wants. And that's where it started. And then I from that sort of developed Avenir in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, but more broadly. So I ended up as a psychologist, I very much, as I mentioned, around the strategic space, around culture change, around behavior, and around leadership development. So I felt like actually I want to broaden. I don't just want to go niche into gender. Let me do the work that's really needed to support organizations to create a more inclusive culture. And that's where my love is, that's where my passion is. um, and I absolutely do love what I do, and all of the conversations that I've had facilitating globally, across industries with leaders, all the stories that they have shared, all of the discomfort that they have
mm,
felt with the conversation and with diversity, equity, and inclusion in general, is where the book came from. It was one of those things where I was sort of thinking, what shall I do next? I've got a podcast show and I'm doing
mm,
this work. How do I get this more? My drive is always to try and affect as much societal and organizational change as possible. So how do I do that? And then people were saying, Nadia, you need to write a book.
mm,
And I said, nah, I really don't need to write a book. By this point, this was like 2020, 2021. I then had our second daughter,
mm,
who was only one. And I was like, really? I don't need to write a book. I've got enough. And then, but you know, when multiple people tell you this, and then people start signposting you to this one publisher,
Mm.
this amazing woman called Alison Jones, who owns Practical Inspiration Publishing. And multiple people signpost me to her. So I have to at least have a conversation with her. And by then I'd kind of come up with the model that's in my book. It wasn't as thought through as it is obviously now, but it was like the starting point, the idea of, do you know what? I've seen so many leaders who there are barriers to them being inclusive, and one of them is how willing they are to act towards inclusion. And there are certain narratives around diversity, equity, and inclusion that jar with them. So emotionally, they're not bought in, and they never will unless they overcome that. And also their receptiveness to learning about themselves and about people who are different from them. And so there came that sort of the 2x2 model that's in my book, which, as a good MBA, you know, we love a 2x2 model. We love them. And so it came from that. And that's this conversation with my publisher, who just kind of said, look, I said, I don't know how to write a book, you know, and she was like, I will help you. Um, to the structure of it. You know, she didn't help me obviously with the content, but she helped me just kind of formulate my thoughts and understand, well, why is this book important to the world, and how is it different from the other books that are out there? And that's the book.
It sounds like it came from a really deeply sort of personal place as
Mm.
well, and then yeah, being able to tie that into doing what you doing what you love, yeah, shows just how it came about. Thinking of the title, Beyond Discomfort, is great, and it really hits a nail on the head. And I think people resonate just by seeing those two words together. And I'm sure it reflects what a lot of people think about when thinking of things like inclusion. Um, you know, people and leaders especially want to get it right. You know, they clearly want to do the best for their people, but can be so afraid of getting it wrong. um, that we've heard, you know, through the business school, people either not taking action because they're too scared of saying the wrong thing, or they take action in ways that maybe down the line are shown to be sort of unhelpful. So what would you say to leaders who are sort of in that cautious mindset of thinking, I want to do
Mm.
something, but I don't know what to do? What would you say to them?
So, yeah, I have to say that I'm not surprised that there are a lot of people who are concerned about saying or doing the wrong thing or misstepping in some way. And that's because, you know, quite honestly, there's been so many stories in the media and possibly with people they know who have misstepped and then cancelled completely, and no one ever hears of them again. You know, and that's really concerning, especially if you do have some sort of leadership position in the organization. You know, the higher you are, the more risky it is because you've got more to lose. And we hold this kind of leader should know everything, the archetypal leader who, you know, should have the answers, should know the way forward, should know what they're doing, should be able to guide their people forwards in a certain direction. And there's something about being an inclusive leader, which is that vulnerability piece, that humility piece about acknowledging to ourselves and also to others that we don't hold all the answers. Um, and I think there's a lot of pressure and expectation from organizations that their leaders should know the answers. And I think that there's something culturally that we need to get past, which is for leaders to say, I haven't walked your path. You know, I don't know what it's like to be, um, you know, an Israeli woman living in the UK, or, you know, I
Yeah.
don't know. Um, and that's okay. That's okay, because we can't have possibly learnt and understood everyone else's perspective and experiences in life. That's not possible. Um, and to then acknowledge that that limits us in some way. Yeah.
Mm.
Yes, it, you know, the fact that we have experienced what we have guides our own decision making, and it's probably led to partly to our successes. So it's very useful to lean on what we know and our truths and our reality. But actually, at times, leaders need to get over that block of whatever they know is the right way, and therefore they need to stand by their decisions because that's what they feel is the right thing. Sometimes that's really comforting for followers, for employees. Of course, it's great to have a leader who is very decisive and knows what they're doing. But where are the times where you can hold that uncertainty and be able to voice it and say, I'm really not sure what is the best way here, because what I know and what I've experienced might not be what's going to be right for everyone or the most inclusive approach here. So I really need you to feed in and support me to help me make this decision. So that's the answer, really, in a very long-winded way. How open are leaders to being able to ask for support, for being able to ask for help, but to be able to say, look, I'm going to say something and it might come out in a way that I don't intend it to, but I don't know at the moment the language to use to ask it any other way. So please bear with me and help me to reframe this question or this thought so that it is more inclusive. So you can frame it that way. People will see that you're trying, at least. Now, equally, it's important that the organisation supports those leaders to do that. And that means if they do misstep and if they do upset a few people, that person then isn't fired, that there aren't stories in the organisation where people disappear and never heard of again because they did or said something. So again, I think that the culture of the organisation is important here for leaders to then role model what it is we need to see.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And
Mm.
just think about things. You can easily miss the sort of the beauty in diversity. I mean, if everyone had only sort of a few degrees of difference between their sort of experiences and background, life would be really boring. It'd be really
Right?
dull if you
Mm.
could very easily step into everyone else's shoes by just changing your hairstyle or something. It'd be very dull. So that's really helpful advice. Thank you. We'll probably type that up later. Um, just thinking about then the book itself, where you
Mm.
clearly come on. It took a little while to write, and that's really good that you really sort of took time and care putting this together. Um, did anything surprising come from the writing process as you were putting thoughts to paper?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so. As I mentioned, right, I'm not, well, I am an author now, but I wasn't an author then, right? I didn't know how to write a book, and I didn't know, quite frankly, if I had enough to say about inclusive leadership, and there's this whole narrative in my head, this inner dialogue that was playing out, certainly before I wrote the book and during, for sure. Like, is there enough to say to write, to warrant a whole book on this? And I suppose the surprise for me, or what, it was a very emergent process in writing this book. And what emerged was in essence a surprise, because as I started each chapter, I had this moment of, I know broadly what I want to say here, but I could write that in a couple of sentences. So this needs to be a whole chapter about this. So how can I help and hold someone's hand through my thought process so that they understand by the end of it, and that I've landed the points that I want to make in an as effective way as possible, and in as accessible way as possible. And so there came the storytelling. So my book is full of storytelling. Some of them are personal stories, very personal to me, that I've brought in, but also through my podcast conversations, a lot of my guests' stories too. And so there came this, this emerge. Every chapter, there was a point where I'd start at the beginning and go, I have no idea actually what needs to go in this chapter. And then I'd kind of start writing, and I'd get over a particular, by the halfway point, I'm like, I I get it. I know what this chapter's about now. And then I'd kind of, surf through to the end of the chapter going, wow, yeah, actually, I get this chapter now. And then I'd start the next chapter and be exactly the same place. I was like, I have no idea what this chapter's about. Um, so for me, that's what this writing process offered. And actually through it, I've very much consolidated my own understanding and my own. So it's almost like I knew what I was seeing from leaders. I knew what I was hearing, hence the emergence of the model. But it's not until I started writing and telling the stories and demonstrating evidence for it that from things that I've heard and seen did it crystallize for me. I think a lot of authors might tell you that same story. I don't know for sure, but I imagine that just writing it down and yeah, it just helps with my own thinking.
Um, No, I completely agree. I think that's also just a really good bit of advice for anyone who's thinking of writing their own book or wondering if they can or can't do it. Yeah, but you're sort of proving to yourself as you write as well that you do know what
Yeah,
you do know what you're talking about. That you've walked through it. Um,
yeah.
and so thinking of that, then the conversations you've had with leaders and businesses, you've come up with um, uh, a model that clearly, as you said, everyone who's been through the Henley process is well versed in learning models and then applying them later.
Mm,
Um, thinking of then speaking to sort of businesses, is there a core message? Obviously, clearly there's multiple chapters, so there are multiple messages that leaders need to
mm,
hear. But if there's one thing you'd want anyone who's in leadership or management in a large firm needed to hear today, what would that be from the
mm.
book?
Um, I think it's important if you're strategically going to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into your organization, that you don't simply teach your leaders what they need to do, right?
Mm,
You can't just sheep dip them through an inclusive leadership program that just tells them how to be an inclusive leader. You need to be curious, you need to show empathy, you need to have cultural intelligence. Well, that's great. But actually, from a if from within them, diversity, equity, and inclusion jars in some way, that it hits a value that doesn't align with what the organization's saying or doing, um, they're not going to do what you want or what you need them to do in order to achieve that strategy. So it's so important, whilst tempting to kind of go, well, we've put everyone through an inclusive leadership program, or they've had unconscious bias training or whatever it is, and so therefore they should know what they're doing. Well, yes, they might know what they're doing, but that doesn't mean they're going to do it. And as a psychologist, that's fundamentally, I've very much leaned on my psychology
mm,
in writing this, my psychology background in writing this book. Because we know that humans, they need motivation, they need that understanding. And I think that we've missed a trick here when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, thinking that everyone will just buy into it. But why? Why should they? Particularly for people who might fall into a lot of majority characteristics, and I'm just for example, white, male,
mm,
cis hetero, able-bodied men, right? What's in it for them? What are they going to get out of this work, particularly if they see positive action programs for
mm,
Black women, or it it's not going to it's not you're not going to get the change you need unless you dedicate that time to opening up these conversations and having the uncomfortable discussions where people feel safe to be able to share, ask the challenging questions, and have a platform where we can actually all understand together how everyone benefits from diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's where I suggest organizations start.
mm. Thank you so much. That's a really strong challenge, but as you say, the goal's so worth it of getting
Mm,
there. And um, yeah, moving from comfort to discomfort to beyond discomfort,
mm,
as your book says. So Nadia, that's us our conversation done for today, but obviously it's a conversation that will keep going on and on and on for hopefully not forever, but hopefully the conversation starts shifting soon. Where can people hear more from you if their sort of interest is piqued and they think, I want to do more in this space? Where can they hear more from you and your work?
Yeah. So I am on socials. So LinkedIn and Instagram are probably the best places to find me. So Nadia Nagamootoo is the handle. And I post regularly, and I'm always happy to hear if people want to drop me a message on those platforms. I have a podcast show. I've mentioned it a few times here. It's
Mm.
called Why Care? It's coming into its fifth season now, so, and I have had the privilege of speaking to some incredible people on talking about diversity, equity, inclusion in organizations from an organizational perspective, but also from a personal lived experience perspective. So you can definitely access me there. And of course, the book, which is, you know, on bookshelves in bookstores in the UK, as well as Amazon and the usual places you can buy, and the ebook. And I just recorded the audiobook, which will be out early July for those of you who like audiobooks. Yeah, they're the main platforms, but I am genuinely always happy to hear from anyone who ever wants to have a conversation about this. On the Beyond Discomfort website, you can join the community, and I'm going to be starting doing some community calls
Mm.
where we can talk about this too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nadia. And yeah, that book again is Beyond Discomfort: Why Inclusive Leadership is Hard and What to Do About It. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Nadia. Thank you.
Thank you.